Hi everyone, today I'm going to be covering Chapter 4 on the textbook. Before viewing this PowerPoint video, please make sure you watch the other videos I posted on Canvas because I'm going to be referring to them during this PowerPoint, especially the market video. So first, I would define attention as concentrating or focusing on specific locations or stimuli for the purpose of allowing that information to enter awareness. Attention in cognitive psychology refers to the same thing it does colloquially. Concentrating or focusing on something, paying close attention to something. Additionally, we need to emphasize that there is a close link between attention and awareness. And by awareness, I mean becoming conscious of something in the environment. The market video does a good job demonstrating this. As a reminder, in the market video, you saw various images. The first was a scene of a market, followed by a solid gray image, then the same market scene but with a small change, and then another solid gray image. These images were repeated over and over again, and your task was to identify what object in the market scene changed. This is known as a change detection task. If you're anything like me and the students in my face-to-face classes, it probably took you about 30 seconds to notice the change, that the guy's pants changed color. He basically went from wearing blue jeans to khakis. We might wonder then, why is it difficult to notice this change in the example, or what does this change blindness tell us about attention? Well, what this illustrates is that attention is needed for awareness. Here's the argument. When you look around a room, it probably seems to you like you are aware of the color, the shape, the location of all of the objects in your environment. So just take a second to do this. Look around the room you're in and notice the color of the objects, their shape, where they are located, any of the sounds you can hear, any smells, anything at all. So it probably seems like you are fully aware of all of this information, that you are aware of the properties of all of these objects. However, the change detection activity demonstrates that we are not. That is, if you were aware of all of this information, then you would notice the change right away, right? If you were truly aware of all of the colors of the objects in the environment, including the market scene when you first looked at it, you would notice right away that in one image the guy is wearing blue pants, and in the next image he's wearing khakis. The change would be obvious. But it isn't obvious, and instead it takes you a while to notice the change. How then do you finally notice the change? Well, we only notice the change when we are attending to the area where the change occurs. So yes, when did you finally notice the change? It wasn't when you were looking at or attending to the right part of the scene. Instead, it was when you were attending to the area of the scene where the man was standing. It was only then when you became aware of the change. So what change detection demonstrates then is that the only area of the scene we are actually aware of is the region we are attending to. So again, it might seem that you are aware and conscious of the properties of all objects in the scene, but this activity demonstrates that you aren't. Instead, there's a close link between attention and awareness, and you are only currently aware of what you are attending to. In the textbook, Goldstein discusses 4 different types of attention, so that's what I want to discuss next. The first type of attention is divided attention, paying attention to 2 or more sources of information or stimuli simultaneously. Let's go back to our Crystal example to explain this type of attention. While Crystal is jogging, she may want to run in between the umbrella and the seashell, and while doing so, of course, it's important that she doesn't step on either of them. To make sure she doesn't, Crystal might pay attention to both of these items simultaneously. This would be an example of divided attention. Another example of divided attention would be doing another activity while driving, such as changing the radio station or talking on a cell phone. In this case, you're attending to 2 sources of information simultaneously, the road and then either the radio or your conversation. Goldstein discusses several studies which show that dividing attention impairs performance compared to only attending to one task at once, and he gives some specific examples about driving. So make sure you read the textbook to get this information. The next type of attention Goldstein discusses is selective attention, focusing attention on one stimulus or piece of information while ignoring others. So let's say Crystal wants to get extra fancy, that she wants to try jumping over the umbrella. If she does, she'll want to pay really close attention to the umbrella while ignoring all other information that might distract her, such as a seagull squawking overhead. So this would be an example of selective attention. She's focusing her attention exclusively on the umbrella and ignoring all other stimuli in the environment. For another example, let's say that while you're driving, you have some music playing on the radio and a passenger in the front seat speaking with you. Normally, you might divide your attention and pay attention to the music or your passenger while driving. But if you're driving through a construction zone or if there's heavy traffic, you might use selective attention. You might focus exclusively on driving and ignore the music or all other distractions. One of the first paradigms used to study selective attention in cognitive psychology was the dichotic listening task. In it, different messages are played to participants' left and right ears. So in this example, this person has the message, "The meaning of life is," being played to his right ear, and the message, "The yellow dog chased," being played to his left ear. So different messages are being played to the two ears. Participants' task in this study, in this type of task, is to pay attention to one of the messages by shadowing it. And by shadowing, I mean repeating the message out loud. So let's say our subject was asked to shadow the message in his left ear. What he would have to do is to say, "The yellow dog chased" out loud, and he would have to do this while trying to ignore the other unintended message. So again, the yellow dog chased is the intended message that the participant is shadowing by saying out loud. The meaning of life is the unintended message that the participant is trying to ignore. Notice how this is a selective attention task because that's both components that I mentioned on the previous slide. A, the person is trying to attend to a message, while B, ignoring other information in the environment. The typical finding from studies on the dichotic listening task is that participants typically shadow the intended message quite easily, but are unaware of the words in the unintended message. So in other words, they successfully use selective attention to become aware of the message in the intended ear and are generally unaware of the information in the unintended ear. This is consistent with what we've been discussing on previous slides, where only attended information enters awareness. Right? The shadowed message that participants pay attention to enters their awareness and they can repeat it, while the unintended message that they are trying to ignore doesn't enter awareness. However, Goldstein does discuss that information from the unintended message does seem to be processed at some level, and he also talks about several models of selective attention designed to explain participants' performance on the dichotic listening task. So make sure you read the textbook to get this information. The other thing I want to discuss regarding selective attention is the Stroop effect, which is that people take longer to name the ink color of a word when the word is printed in a different versus the same color ink. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this effect, but I want to go over it just in case some aren't. What I'm going to do is to show you some stimuli, and I want you to name the ink color that they are presented in. So again, in the Stroop task, you are always naming the ink color. So here are the first set of stimuli. Name the ink color. Okay, so this should be pretty easy, right? Red, green, orange, blue, yellow, purple. Not too difficult. Let's try the next list. Again, name the ink color that these words are presented in. Again, not too hard. Red, blue, black, green, yellow, purple. Let's try one final list. Okay, so this one's probably a lot more tricky, right? Green, blue, purple, red, green, blue, really tough. So that's the Stroop effect. Naming an ink color is more difficult when the word is printed in a different color ink versus when it's printed in the same color ink. And note that this is a selective attention task. You're trying to pay attention to the color of the ink while ignoring the word itself. What's equally interesting, though, is why the Stroop effect occurs. The most common explanation for the Stroop effect is that people are naturally faster at reading words than identifying ink colors, and so when they are different, this discrepancy slows ink naming. So we are all very practiced readers to the point where when we see a word, we read it automatically and very quickly. We are less practiced at naming colors. While we all obviously can, we generally don't go around all day yelling out all the colors we see. As a result, reading has become an automatic task for us, while ink naming is slower. So when we see the word red printed in green ink, even though our task is to say green, our brain processes the word red first. This creates interference, and because our brain says red first, it takes time, it slows us down, to overcome this interference and actually say green. Obviously, when the word and ink color are the same, there is no interference, you just say green. But again, when they are incompatible, you are slower to name the ink color because there's interference from having read the different color word first. The third type of attention is overt attention, moving one's eyes to shift attention from one location to another. Normally, there's a close, natural relationship between where we are looking and where our attention is being directed. Right? If you want to pay attention to the television, you look at the television. Your professor probably gets mad at you when you're on your laptop looking at Facebook during class because she thinks you aren't paying attention to her. There are a couple vocabulary words that go along with overt attention that you need to know. The first is saccade, which refers to a movement of the eyes, and the second is a fixation, which is the period between saccades where the eyes are stationary. Let's use an example of Where's Waldo to illustrate these terms. In case I'm dating myself here, in Where's Waldo, your task is to find Waldo, who looks like this, somewhere in a cluttered scene like on the right. Like we talked about with change blindness, you can't become aware of everything in the scene at once, and instead you have to shift your attention from location to location to find Waldo. So, when you shift your attention by moving your eyes, this is called a saccade, so you make numerous saccades as you look around the image. The period of time where your eyes are at rest and you're actually looking at something is a fixation, and so you fixate on lots of locations until you eventually fixate on Waldo and become aware of him, because that's where your attention is directed. Now, fixations are often influenced by many factors that we can generally categorize into either bottom-up or top-down factors. Remember the distinction between bottom-up and top-down from Chapter 3. Some bottom-up factors that influence eye movements is that fixations are drawn to, that is, attention is captured by regions in the scene that are high in saliency, especially in color and motion. And by saliency, we mean uniqueness. For example, a green apple presented amongst a group of red apples would be very salient because it's the only green object in the scene. Note that a green apple presented amongst green pears would not be very salient as there are lots of green items, and so it's no longer unique. To give you another example, when I was a graduate student, one of the research projects I worked on was to look at the relationship between fixations and salient regions in scenes. The first thing I did was to track participants' fixations while they viewed natural scenes like the one on the left here. Each circle shows a person's fixation, with the size of the circle indicating how long they fixated on that part of the image. So we can see that people spend most of their time fixating on the building, the fence, and the people on the lawn. But hardly anybody fixated on the trees or the sky. Next, I ran the images through a saliency model, which basically identified the most salient or unique areas of the scene in terms of features like orientation and color. The brighter the area in the image on the right, the more salient that region in the scene was. Anyway, as you might be able to tell by looking at these images, what I found was that there was a close relationship between saliency and where people fixated. The building, the fence, and the lawn were the most salient regions of the scene, and as we saw in the image on the left, that's where participants fixated the most. The sky and the trees were the least salient regions. They are darker in the saliency image, and that's where people fixated on the least. So again, a bottom-up factor that influences eye movements is that fixations are drawn to regions that are high in saliency, that are high in uniqueness. The textbook also spends some time talking about top-down factors that influence fixations, namely that fixations are drawn to seem incongruent and to task-relevant stimuli. So here we have a kitchen scene. In the top image, there's a scene congruent item on top of the stove. There's a pot. This is a scene congruent image. It's something that you would expect to find in a kitchen on top of the stove. In the bottom image, there's a scene incongruent item on the stove, a printer. Again, this is incongruent with a kitchen scene. It's not something you would expect to find in a kitchen on top of the stove. The finding is that participants spend more time fixating on scene incongruent than scene congruent items, presumably because they are out of place and incongruent with their top-down information of the type of items that normally go in that type of scene. The textbook also talks about how when people perform tasks, like when they make peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, they fixate on the item that is relevant for that part of the task. So when they need the jelly, they look at the jelly. When they need the knife, they make a saccade to fixate on the knife, etc. And so, Fixations are influenced by top-down factors, things like objects that are out of place in a scene, or items that are relevant for a person's current task. The fourth type of attention is covert attention, shifting attention without moving one's eyes. We said that attention is normally tied to fixations, but it is possible to decouple them. For instance, Steph Curry is famous for his no-look passes in basketball, where he takes advantage of covert attention. That is, he is looking straight ahead of him, but he's really paying attention to his teammate off to the side. So he's fixating on one location, but is actually attending to a different location. The spatial cueing paradigm is one task that is used to study covert attention. In it, a spatial cue that attracts attention is presented prior to a target display. Each trial begins with a fixation display that consists of a cross at the center. Participants are told to fixate on the cross and to not move their eyes away from it throughout the entire trial. Also, as you can see, there are two rectangles, one on either side of the cross, which indicate the two locations where the target could appear. Then the cue display appears. The cue display is a spatial cue that indicates where the target is most likely to appear. It is accurate 80% of the time. So in this example, where it is pointing to the left, it means that there is an 80% chance that the target will appear in the left rectangle. So the spatial cue encourages participants to shift their attention to that location so they can become aware of the target faster. But again, because participants can't move their eyes away from the fixation cross, they must use covert attention. They must shift their attention to the left side without moving their eyes. Then the target appears and participants respond as fast as possible when they see the target. There are valid trials and invalid trials. On valid trials, the target appears at the location indicated by the cue, and remember the cue is accurate 80% of the time. On invalid trials, the target appears at a different location than the one indicated by the cue, which occurs 20% of the time. So the question is, can participants actually shift their attention covertly? That is, can they shift their attention to the left side of the screen where the cue says the target is likely to appear? If they can, then what you should find is that participants would be faster on valid versus invalid trials because their attention is already at that location for the valid trials. But if people can't shift their attention covertly, then there should be no difference in reaction time on valid versus invalid trials. The results show that yes, participants do respond faster and more accurately on valid versus invalid trials. So this demonstrates the effectiveness of covert attention. Participants can use a spatial cue to shift their attention to the indicated side of the screen without moving their eyes, allowing them to be faster to respond to the target when it appears at that location, that is on valid trials, versus on invalid trials where the target appears at a different location. Alright, that's all from Chapter 4 for me.